In one of the most remote corners of the world, on the border between a dense forest and rocky mountains, there was a village that no one remembered anymore. Once, life flourished here. Families worked in the fields, children played in the shady groves, and every evening, the light in the windows of the houses reminded everyone of warmth and comfort. But now everything had changed. The village was abandoned, and only the winds and mists descending from the mountains recalled the former glory of this place. Now only ruins remained. The skeletons of houses, rotten roofs, and broken windows stared at the sky as if asking why they had been forsaken. However, those who knew the legends of this land told that the village was cursed. They said that after sunset, creatures came here that people could not see but could feel their presence. I was a child when I first heard these stories. My grandmother, the only person in our family who had lived in that village, told them to me before bed. She said that one night, when I was still very young, the entire village suddenly fell silent. People stopped talking, laughing, and even moving. Someone claimed to have seen a figure appear on the horizon, but no one knew who it was or where it had come from. When morning finally came, the village was empty. Only my grandmother and a few others managed to escape. These stories frightened me, yet they also attracted me. I wanted to understand what really happened. My grandmother often noticed this interest and strictly forbade me from trying to go back there. She always said that place was not for the living and that I should forget about it. However, the older I got, the more it drew me to find out the truth. What really happened that night? Why did my grandmother survive? And why do I seem to feel an invisible connection to this land? Years passed. I finished university, got a job, but the thought of that village never left me. Its shadows followed me in my dreams, calling me back. Eventually, I couldn't resist. I decided that I had to return, that I had to find out what had happened to that place and why it bothered me so much. I packed my things and set out on the journey. The road was long and difficult. In some places, the path was completely hidden under leaves, and in others, it was washed out by rains. Finally, after several days of wandering through the forest, I reached the place where the village once stood. But what I saw completely shocked me. The fog surrounding the village was so thick that I could barely see my outstretched hand in front of me. It seemed alive, sliding between the trees and the ruined buildings. The wind here was different, its howls strangely muffled, as if someone was trying to tell me something through it. I walked towards the house where, according to my grandmother's stories, my great-grandfather had lived. It was an old, half-ruined cottage with a slanted roof and partially collapsed walls. When I entered, the air became cold and heavy, as if everything that had once been alive here had now absorbed suffering. In the corner of the house, I found an old, dusty book. Its pages were filled with strange writings in a language unknown to me. In the middle of the book, I discovered a map showing the village, but with some unusual marks and symbols added. In the center of the map was a point surrounded by rings. And something told me that this place was the key to everything. At night, I couldn't sleep. The feeling that someone was watching me was too strong. Gradually, the fog began to thicken, and it seemed to be alive, trying to engulf me. Suddenly, I heard footsteps outside the window. They were quiet, barely audible, but unmistakably clear. I stepped outside, hoping to see who it was. Behind the house, in the shadow of the trees, I saw a figure. It stood motionless, staring straight at me. I froze, my heart pounding wildly. I tried to speak, but my voice refused to obey. The figure took a step forward, and the fog began to move with it. The moonlight illuminated her face, and I saw that it was a woman. Her eyes were empty, like those of a dead person, and her skin was gray. She slowly raised her hand, pointing at something behind me. I turned and saw that the fog had retreated, revealing a path leading to the forest, to that very point on the map. Since I found the book and the map, I felt that I had to go there. Something was drawing me to this place, and despite my fear, I decided to follow the woman. The forest was gloomy, but I walked forward, guided by something stronger than common sense. I felt no fatigue or hunger, only a desire to reach the point on the map. Finally, I reached the place marked on the map. It was a small clearing surrounded by tall trees. In its center stood an ancient stone covered with the same symbols as in the book. On the stone were visible traces of blood, old, almost blackened. I realized that this was an altar. This was where it all began. Strange things started happening around me. The shadows in the forest began to move as if they were alive. I heard whispers, first quiet, then growing louder and louder. They merged into one voice, calling me to the altar. I felt the ground begin to tremble under my feet, and the air became heavy and suffocating. I stood before the altar and couldn't take my eyes off the symbols on its surface. Suddenly, everything around me started to spin, and I felt the ground slipping away beneath my feet. I was surrounded by cold, icy fog that seemed to penetrate to the bone. I tried to step back, but my legs wouldn't obey me. At that moment, I saw figures emerging from the fog. They were blurry, indistinct, but I knew they were the villagers who had disappeared many years ago. They surrounded me, their faces expressionless and their eyes lifeless. I felt them begin to pull me toward the altar, their cold hands grasping me from all sides. I didn't know how much time passed while I struggled with them. It felt like this nightmare lasted forever. But at some point I realized that resistance was futile. These beings were too strong, and their will was unbreakable. I felt them pulling me closer and closer to the stone, and I knew this was the end. When they finally dragged me to the altar, I felt the cold surface of the stone touch my skin. At that moment, everything around me disappeared. The fog cleared, and the figures dissolved into the air. I was left alone, standing before the ancient stone, which now looked completely different. Its symbols glowed brightly, and the air was filled with energy. I realized that I had solved the village's mystery, but this knowledge had become my downfall. Time began to twist around me, and I felt my consciousness slipping away. The last thing I saw were the bright stars in the night sky, which seemed to mock me. I closed my eyes and knew that there would be no return. Now I am a part of this place, a part of the ancient curse that will never let me go.